I remember back in 2014 on the undercard of Sean Porter's IBF title defense against Kell Brook. I remember Deontay Wilder fought on that undercard. And if you guys remembered, that fight took place in the United States, in California. Kell Brook had come over and he was he was the mandatory for Sean Porter's IBF strap. And Eddie Hearn, obviously, is Kell Brook's promoter. He was also there. And that was the first time that Eddie Hearn saw Deontay Wilder live, because Deontay Wilder fought on that undercard and he fought a journeyman named Jason Gavern. It was right before it was right before Deontay Wilder was going to fight Bermane Stiverne for the WBC championship, which he still has to this day. And I remember after the fight, they asked, somebody interviewed him. I forgot who it was, but it was one of these, big interviewing channels that always interviews these fighters. And they interviewed Mr. Eddie Hearn. And they asked him, what do you think about Deontay Wilder? Because, he was there and he saw Wilder live. And at the time, Anthony Joshua maybe had less than 9 fights, right? He had only been pro for literally less than a year, maybe about 10 months. And I remember that, Eddie Hearn looked into the camera with a big grin in his face, and he smiled and he said, I think Anthony Joshua could beat Deontay Wilder right now. He was so unimpressed with what he saw in Deontay Wilder's performance against Jason Gavern that he was so confident. Even then, that was the first time they talked about, matter of fact, that was the first time Eddie Hearn talked about how he felt between a match between Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder. It was before Deontay Wilder became the WBC champion. It was when he was just a contender. And he saw him against Jason Gavern, and he was like so assured that his fighter, Anthony Joshua, could beat him right now. Because at the time, Anthony Joshua had like 9 fights, or maybe even less than that. And at the time, Deontay Wilder had, I believe, like 31 fights. He had way more fights than someone like Joshua. And he was so certain that if he were to match up his fighter, Joshua, with Deontay Wilder, that Joshua would win. But it's funny how, 4 years later, a lot of things change. Now, obviously, Joshua is the dude who is the main guy, in my opinion, at heavyweight. And then you got Wilder, who's the second place to Joshua, who is also a champion. And now you got Eddie Hearn saying that, he doesn't want to give he doesn't want Anthony Joshua to just have an 8-week training camp, because he wants Anthony Joshua to be 100% and have the best training camp of his life to prepare himself for Deontay Wilder. But I just find that odd because, 4 years ago he was saying that his fighter could easily beat Deontay Wilder when his fighter was just a prospect with 5 fights. 4 years ago he was so confident that he was saying, oh yeah, if they fought right now, Joshua would easily destroy Deontay Wilder. But now he seems to have less confidence in Anthony Joshua than he had back in 2014. Because, since then, Anthony Joshua has actually gotten better as a fighter. And you would think that Eddie Hearn would be over the moon and be like, oh, this is easy work. Anthony Joshua would destroy Wilder even with a 2-week training camp. But Eddie Hearn, this is how you know Eddie Hearn. Eddie Hearn talks a lot of shit about Deontay Wilder. But this is how you know that Eddie Hearn knows that Deontay Wilder is really a threat, a legitimate threat to Anthony Joshua, because he wants Anthony Joshua to be 100% prepared, right? Because he knows that Deontay Wilder is a threat. He knows this. Eddie Hearn is a promoter, and every time they ask him questions about his opinion on Deontay Wilder, he's always negative, right? He's always acting like Deontay Wilder is rubbish. But he knows, and all of Anthony Joshua fans know, all you guys who are watching this video who are Anthony Joshua fans, know that Deontay Wilder's a threat. You could go around making fun of all of his attributes, but at the end of the day, you know that he's a threat. And when that fight happens in 2020, you're going to be biting your nails watching throughout that fight. You're going to be literally biting your nails, probably shaking a bit. You're probably going to have a hard time coming out with speeches. You're gonna be stuttering a lot because you're going to be nervous watching Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, because you know that Deontay Wilder's a threat. So you could go around making fun of Deontay Wilder all you want, but you know that he's a threat. And that's why you go around criticizing him, bashing him, calling him all types of names, because you look at him as a threat. You perceive him as a threat. And you know that he can, in fact, beat Anthony Joshua. And it's the same way that Eddie Hearn feels. And that's why he's trying to have his fighter have all the advantages and train, get the proper training camp, and probably they're going to hire the best sparring partners because they know Wilder's a threat.